Hi, Mark Erdman here from Earthman Forge. As you know, I'm a professional full-time objects conservator. I conserve and restore three-dimensional artifacts, such as the one you see on the bench today. I thought this would be an interesting project to show you because it illustrates a jigging procedure using this not quite 90-degree plywood angle that I'm using to hold the base of this statuette figure. And the reason I'm doing that is because I have to adhere the tail back in place so that gravity can help me when I put the adhesive on and I put it in place. It'll stay put and not want to sag as the epoxy is curing. So a lot of times when folks bring me an artifact, they describe it as best they can, but they don't necessarily know what the material is that it's made out of. In this case, it appears to be a bronze figurine or a sculptural group. But when I saw the break edge, I could tell right away that this is actually a cast resin, and it's been probably electroplated with copper and then patinated chemically to give it this nice bronze look. So what I did, and when it came into me, the tail was broken, it was up at an angle, and there was a piece of wire just too close to the surface. The wire was bent and it was holding it in position. But I knew that if I tried to bend that wire back, I'd never get these break edges to be a tight fit. So what I did is I just snipped that wire. I know I don't have great close-up on this camera, but I ground the edge of the wire where it was protruding out of here on both sides so that it's no longer going to show. I drilled to accept a new piece of stainless steel wire, and then I'm going to use epoxy to put it back in place. And I just used a little carpenter's angle measuring tool to establish the right angle to hold this so that the tail is straight up and down. And then I'm just going to squirt some epoxy in there in both sides and stick it down. And just so you can see a little bit better how I made this jig to support the statue in this position. I use this tool, which can adjust to any angle. I held the base at this angle, measured that, and then I used this to set my table saw blade. I cut the piece of plywood in half, and then I just screwed it together, and then with some weight, it can hold the whole thing in position. I've used this epoxy before on this channel. It is Loctite E20HP. It's a toughened epoxy with a high peel strength and high shear strength, which is important for a position like this where if it receives a shock or a bump, I don't want it to break off. I don't need a lot. Some epoxy down in the hole, in the tail. Break. There is a loss along the top where that previous little wire armature was protruding through the surface, and there was some bits of resin that chipped off. So later, after this is structurally sound, I will apply a fill. I may even add some bronze powder. Give it a little time to settle because I don't want air pockets inside there. Snug it down nice and tight. and then I'll clean it up. Can't resist. Okay, so that's what did it. Some thin blue masking tape. I was able to conform it. It works better than the transparent Scotch tape. This stuff just wasn't able to conform to the surface, but the blue tape did, and that seems to be helping in holding those edges together. I just don't want it to creep apart ever so slightly because it is such a good... After that sets up, I'll mix up a little bit more epoxy, mix in some bronze powder, and fill that little loss. So the epoxy has set up overnight, and the little bit that I squirted out here on the plastic, it's cured, is a little rubbery, which is what gives it that shock resistance, that toughened aspect. So I'm going to pull off the tape. I'm going to support this, pull off the clamps. And pull it down. So I just need to do some fills. There's a surface loss there. But other than that, it's all the break edges are really nice and tight and clean. So what I have chosen is some raw umber. And what I'm going for here is to match the lighter colors. You can see darker recesses, but what I want to do is start with the lightest color that I see in there. I'm probably also going to use some of this antique bronze mica powder. That's also in the same color family. But between these two, I'll experiment with them and see. This one has a redder tone, and this one is a bit cooler. The epoxy I'm using for creating the fill is Epotech 301-2. It's a clear epoxy, and I'm using it because it has a long open time, or a long cure time, long enough to experiment with colors, mixing colors. It is non-yellowing, so it won't change color with time. It's important to weigh each component before mixing, because if you over-catalyze it, it will of course speed up the curing, but it does run the risk of turning yellow as it cures. I'm mixing up way more than I need, because what I like to do is I use these little medicine cups, and I first mix in the catalyst, and then I add a thickening agent to bulk it up, fumed silica, and then I separate it out into the cups and use different pigments, a little bit in each one, and that enables me to mix and match the colors. 3-to-1. And then mix thoroughly. Adding the fumed silica enables me to make a paste that I can trowel into the gloss area, and it won't slump or run. scoop out a little bit, maybe a third into there, third into there, and I'll keep that as a reserve if neither of these colors look the way I want them. I'm going to start with the raw umber. So there we go. That's looking pretty dark. Looking more like the darker recesses than the bright highlights. You can see that the color of the pigment is much paler than when it's saturated with the liquid epoxy. Let's see what the mica powder does. That looks pretty close in color, but too reddish. This one is called Antique Silver. It actually looks pretty close. Sometimes you have to go based on the name rather than the appearance, because once it's mixed into a liquid, the colors, even looking in there, it looks much more silver inside the bag than it does on the outside of the bag. These mica powders are really tricky that way. Wow, yeah, it looks steely gray on the small amounts of the other two colors with the antique silver, and see if that will just shift the color in the direction I want it to go. It's actually looking better. I'm going to add a tiny bit of the raw umber to try and cool it down, because the that bronze mica powder is still looking too warm, too orangey. That's getting closer. Smooth it off across the edge, and that gives a nice nice way to compare the color, but that's not good. That's not matching at all. I need a paler color, something similar to the raw umber, but not as dark. What I'm going to try next is burnt umber cypress. It's a much paler burnt umber, and I still have a little bit of the unpigmented epoxy left over here. So I can use, I'm going to take half of that. See how that looks when it's saturated up. It's closer but not exact. Like a smidge of that with the rest of the cypress. Yes, that is much better. Sorry about the terrible close-ups, but that does match. I like that color. Once this cures, I can come back in with some acrylic paints and add in the darker colors to get it to blend and give it that texture that makes it look like a dog's fur. Fortunately, it doesn't have to be perfectly smooth in this case because it does have a texture to it. Okay, I'm gonna leave that. And tomorrow I can come back and clean it up a little bit and add some darker streaks of acrylic. So the epoxy is set, and I'm just gonna sand off the peaks, smooth it out a little bit to match the texture of the original bronze a bit better. This is a fiberglass brush.